As we come to the end of our session, first session, Gordon, what we'd like to do now is introduce Justin Urquhart Stewart, who's going to talk to us about success for the global economy, but there's an elephant and a dragon in the room. He's our first guest speaker of the day. He's the co-founder of 7IM, where he ensured the principle of doing the right thing wasn't just as important today as it was at the outset. Currently, Justin acts as chairman to Regionally, a new investment service he co-founded that redirects investment from London into the UK regions, specifically to scale up SMEs and global private non-retail investors. As an enthusiast of financial education and service, he's the champion of providing clients the very best, clearly expressed. Please give a warm welcome to our first guest speaker of the day, the man with the red braces, Justin Urquhart Stewart.
Jolly good. Thank you very much. Very flattering. God, it's nice to be out. I've got agoraphobia today, suddenly going outside and realising there weren't walls around me. I can walk around the place. Well done. You made it. You know, just hearing just now, it's been a great success, the fact you got all the way through this. But of course, you may have made a success of it. You actually survived so far, and that's good. The trouble is you still have to put up the BBC every night telling you that you're still doomed. If there's one reason you actually think the economy might do badly, and forgive me if you want me to be rude about anyone in particular or any particular country, let me know. I'll make sure I can try and do that. But one person we can be rude about, he's a delightful fellow, but listening to a depressed Welshman giving the news at 6 o'clock every night, Hugh Edwards is probably responsible for less attitude of investment and enthusiasm in our economy. Dear chap, he's a nice fellow. He doesn't know anything about economics. He just reads the autocue. Unfortunately, they tend to write the headlines, which tend to be, you're doomed. That's not actually Welsh accents, is it? No matter. But the equivalent of that. And you carry on doing that for a while, and you start to believe them. Well, actually, it is really quite astonishing, isn't it? Because, as you were just hearing just now, Ian Gordon quite rightly saying, what we've been through, we've never seen before. No one had predicted it. That it would be quite like this. But at the end of it, and we're not quite at the end yet, are we? There's still more to go. Actually, you know, the fact is the economies actually have started bouncing back with a lot of enthusiasm and encouragement and an awful lot of money, but they have done. Go back a year, and people were looking into a very nasty pit indeed. So it's one thing surviving what's happened, but actually now learn from what has happened, because there's going to be more variations and changes, maybe as dramatic as that, who knows. But unfortunately, what we have done is over the years, we have made things so wonderfully efficient. The Japanese came up with an efficiency measurement of sigma 6, which is basically to you and I just in time, everything being absolutely precise in the way it's being managed and handled, which is like stretching elastic band out so it's so tight you're really getting all the power out of it you can until it snaps, and then the whole bloody thing falls apart. And that's exactly what's happened with the supply chains. We made them so efficient and so wonderful that all it takes is one ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal and various other elements. You'll suddenly then find the whole thing starts unwinding. And that isn't the bad news. That's actually some good news. Because it means that fundamentally the economy's got to have to try and change, and those businesses which are awake realize that this throws up huge opportunities. The trouble is they don't know how to go about it, they don't know how to fund it, finance it, control it. And who are they going to go to? You. You are in the most perfect position for this. I'm interested to hear what Ian Gordon was saying about private equity firms sniffing around. They do tend to sniff around. Some of them are quite positive, others bear more resemblance, I have to say, to very strange sort of wolf-like creatures on the savannah, sniffing around for carrion that they can try and get rid of. What they'll be trying to do, of course, and I've seen this in various industries, I see it at the moment happening with, I believe, the plumbing industry, private equity going around buying up plumbers. Why? Because they can package them all together again, make them stronger, make them better. No, actually, probably make sure, first of all, actually you invest in them, which means, of course, you invest. They don't invest. No. They arrange more borrowing in your name to invest, to build it into a much bigger business, and flog it on in 3 years' time to another private equity firm who will say, we've got a really good idea. We're going to make you more efficient by making sure you've got more debt so you can have an efficient balance sheet. And in 3 years' time, the same thing goes through. In my lifespan, I have been approached 7 times with the potential purchase of Debenhams. Every time it happens, there was more and more debt because they were playing pass the parcel with each other. Till eventually, it was no longer a chain of stores. It was just a pile of debt. And whether you're actually going to buy that or not. So good news, the private equity firms are sniffing around because they can see value in your businesses. And your businesses are you and your clients and what you've built up. But be wary. Actually, what you'll find is if you're tied into that for any length of time, you'll be sweating like mad. I reached a tiresome old age. When we set up 7 Investment Management, I did actually put in the rules that when the old farts get to 65, they should go away. Unfortunately, I forgot that I was 65. What it meant, though, was actually then, how do I pass this business on? I've been really lucky, because you know what it's like running a business. You employ people who are brighter than you, which in my case is quite easy. And so I had a great team of people over the years, and I've stepped back so I can talk about it now. We're actually in a position where we were able to manage over 15 billion of client assets, which from naught, I thought was not bad. And it was profitable, reasonably profitable, because we weren't seen to be greedy, unlike some of the firms you come across the entire time. But it meant selling the firm. Who do I sell it to? The private equity firms, who were going to offer a huge amount of money. Perversely, we ended up selling it to the lowest bidder, not the highest bidder. Why? Because the lowest bidder was the business that was actually most like us. It was actually a firm called Caledonia Investment. They're an investment trust. It's the old Kaiser shipping family. Their average investment period is 11 to 15 years. So I want to make sure my clients are not being financially raped by private equity, but by a firm that's actually going to deliver them over time. An interesting sideline, Caledonia Investment have had a rising dividend, albeit small, for 50 years. That's long-term consistency. And if you value your clients, because a lot of them will be personal friends of yours, I never want to do business with personal friends on basis you're asking for disaster, but they sort of end up coming with you, which is very flattering. But be wary with who you're dealing with on this. Now, let's talk about actually what's happening in the world. Because again, the headlines will show you that actually, oh, we're teetering on the edge. We're always teetering on the edge of something. The fact is the global economy is growing at just over 5% a year. That's the long-term average, which considering what's happened in 18 months is astonishing. Now, what's happened, of course, is we've had the sort of V-shaped recovery, sort of up, that comes, probably the other way around, that way around. And so it's hardly surprising because we had furloughing. Good God, 18 months, most of us couldn't spell furloughing, let alone what it was. And all the other supports and C-bills and things like that. And I would actually have some admiration for the Treasury. The speed at which they moved to get these things out was quite remarkable. Has some of it screwed up? Yep. Was some of it gone in the wrong direction? Yep. Was there elements of corruption in some of it? No doubt all of this will come out. But in comparison to what happened, what was happening, it was the right thing to do. And then you have to start coming out of it. And when you come out of it, some strange things happen as well. As you were just talking about just now, not being able to employ people. There's still people there, but they don't want to work. Now, some of it's Brexit, of course. Mr. Farage's delight. We have to live with that, whatever your view on that is. But nonetheless, we're going to have to try and resolve this. And how do you do it? Well, you were talking about just now, but Ian and Gordon, about the technology and what impact that's going to have. It'll have a huge impact, in my view, for the better. So that's encouraging. So let's have a quick whiz around the world. Well, first of all, let's talk about the United States. Here you had Sleepy Joe. Oh, God, I hope he wakes up soon. He's making Trump look good. That's impossible, surely. He's got his support Build Back Better scheme. He's got it through. It was $3 trillion. I love it when we say $3 trillion. I can't get $1 trillion on my calculator. There's only 3 of them. So it's now come down to only a mere trillion. Oh, just the one, that's all right then. And this is a bit like Roosevelt's New Deal. And the great thing about Roosevelt's New Deal during the Depression, it wasn't so much the amount of money that was spent, because actually most of it wasn't. It was actually the message that this is what we're going to be doing and investing, whether it's the highway structure, the railway structure, all sorts of things. And we all know Americans' infrastructure is in a terrible state. Never stand underneath an American bridge. There'll be things coming off it on a regular basis. But it's the fact that government said they're going to be doing this gives business the confidence to know we can follow on. If they're spending that, we can do this too. And remember, it's that one word that runs an economy. Just one word, and it's not Edwards, Hugh otherwise, it's confidence. If you don't have the confidence, your clients don't invest. We don't go out and spend. If you've got the confidence, not overconfidence, realistic confidence, then things will start moving. So part of Build Back Better is that confidence issue. The bit you don't say about the New Deal actually is the primary way where they managed to get out of the Depression was actually the Second World War. I'm not suggesting we go through that. Although I have to say, when you look at issues of Belarus, Ukraine, and Taiwan at the moment, it does make you wonder somewhat. But no need to panic over that side. So actually what you've got in America is Joe Schmo and Mrs. Schmo living in Little Rock, Arkansas, shopping in Walmart. They are the backbone of the American economy, the American consumer. And is the American consumer happy? And the answer is, yeah, not bad. Not bad in terms of wage rises are going up at over 4 to 5%. Hang on a second, and it's vaguely familiar, 4 to 5%. We've had inflation figures out here today, higher than expected, over 4%. The Bank of England was saying it will peak at around about 4 and 4.5%. The word's changed. It will average out at about 4.5%. Hello. That's a bit of a change. And of course, there's a whole generation of people, probably most of us in this room, who don't know about inflation. And inflation in terms of double-digit inflation. Back to the 70s, where we all had extremely embarrassing flared trousers and tank tops, some of which I probably still have, and in the position there where we had double-digit inflation, we got to 25% at one stage. We were looking positive Brazilian. That's probably the wrong description. Brazilian inflation, I mean. In fact, that was at 80%. But we'd never seen that before. And not only that, you tie that with a weakened economy, and you get that strange title of something, stagflation, which is not an inflatable deer. But the whole idea, therefore, of actually having this inflation, which is nibbling away at what's going on, and you're not getting the growth you're supposed to be expecting. That has to be avoided. Otherwise, you can find yourself in a different position. Of course, actually, politicians like a bit of inflation because it erodes the value of the debt. But it's a bit like choosing porridge with some bears, neither too hot nor too cold. I like the stuff in the middle, please. Not always easy to get. So it's a strange situation we've seen. So America now has inflationary pressures running through it. You saw the price of wheat in the past year has gone up by 40%. And that's not just demand, that's also just a time with climate change, the issues over drought in Ukraine, in Soviet Union, in Russia, and America and Canada. But a lot of those base costs have really gone up very significantly. And talking to quite a lot of manufacturers in Britain, particularly I was talking to some furniture manufacturers in East Anglia, and they're talking about input inflation of 11%. 11%. That doesn't mean we all pay 11%. It gets cut off down the way. But nonetheless, it's putting pressure on their margins. Prices are going to be rising. It's building up more inflationary pressure right the way through. So it's a strange time to be in. But the American economy has actually picked up quite nicely. It's doing quite well. It's got more investment coming through. Joe Schmo is happy. The house prices seem to be rising at a reasonable level. What's the problem? Well, the problem is actually going to be, where does the further growth come from? Is there enough growth to actually take it on to the next stage and be able to build more and get more people employed? We've got the same situation we have. It's like shortage of lorry drivers and all the other usual suspects wandering around. But overall, that's actually not a bad position. The new regime, of course, still has the same situation with China. Now, Trump was just stupid dealing with China. He's just really rather thick individual. You do not deal with the Chinese by shouting at them. You deal with the Chinese by actually diplomacy. Actually, you deal with it sitting in a private room with consenting adults and sorting it out quietly. You do not get people to lose face. The Chinese do not do deals like that. And the Chinese know full well, actually, they're going to have to reach arrangements. Why? Because they're nothing if not pragmatic. China and America are in a symbiotic relationship. They can't do without each other. They will bitch and moan at each other. Who is the largest holder of American debt? Well, actually, it's the American government. Okay, who's the second largest holder? Well, actually, most of the time it's China, sometimes it's Japan. But America needs China to keep buying the debt, please. Why would they do that? Because China's biggest export market is America. And it's not going to be replaced by anyone else anytime soon. So this symbiotic relationship, once you get past the political claptrap, they need each other. But there is going to be an awful lot of ego-issues to manage in the meantime. So I'm quite encouraged by what I see in America overall. And that's quite positive. Let's come back then to, say, closer to home, to the EU. Well, the EU actually finds itself in a position where they haven't got a leader anymore. Who was the leader? Well, the sort of de facto leader was Mutti Merkel, wasn't it? Oh, Mutti's now going, and we've now got, well, who? Name another German politician. One that's alive, I mean. That's actually really quite difficult. Macron thinks it's going to be him. That's not what the rest of Europe says. So they find themselves in a position where, where's the driving force? Also, the EU is rather poorer than before. Why? Because one of its wealthiest members just left. And therefore, everything else has to be cut back, and that doesn't go down quite so well. Plus the fact you've got the issue of the group called the Visegrad Group. And this is a group of nations. It's basically Slovakia, Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. And these are guys who said, look, we did not swap to be run by Moscow, to be run by Brussels. We demand powers brought back to us, please. And he goes through a list of them. This is nothing new. They've been doing this 4 or 5 years. It's just that Cameron didn't take any account of this. They were asking for exactly the same thing. And of course, the EU are now reacting to this to try and actually say, well, we've got to make sure Britain's going to be a success by leaving. And you saw the most recent issue, which legal system has priority over the other? Is it EU law or is it local Polish law? Well, of course, actually, under the treaties, it's actually EU law. But to wrap yourself around the flag in this, you could see the frustrations that are there. There is another country in the EU. You've got your 27 members now. Now, actually, there's 28. It's called Brussels. And people get fed up with the EU. What they're actually talking about, they're fed up with Brussels. And so it's very difficult to drive this forward when you've got such a diverse community, one lot trying to actually have a trade group and the other lot trying to form the United States of Europe. Very different entities indeed. Let's get to the hub of it then. What about the euro? Is the euro going to succeed? And the answer is very clear. No, the euro is going to fail. Not yet, not tomorrow, some stage. Why is it going to fail? Well, we have a single currency here at the moment in Britain, at least for the time being. And in that single currency, you have free movement of capital. You have harmonized banking regulation across the whole area. And you have the same fiscal system, not necessarily the same taxes, but the same fiscal structure. That does not exist throughout the euro membership. Some of them don't pay taxes at all. I mean, it's still laughable when you look about the various oddities that Greece has. Up until 2 years ago, if you were a barber in Greece, you could retire at 45. Look, I know they're hairy, but it can't be that bad, surely. So it is rather strange. They don't pay taxes. So are they going to be doing what the Germans are doing anytime soon? No. I know it's an old joke, but I still love the idea of Mrs. Merkel turning up at Athens airport and they ask, actually, what's her occupation? She says, no, not this time. But there is a certain angst in Greece about all of this. Is it resolvable? Actually, yes, it is. You would actually split the currency between the domestic currency, the tradable olive or something like that, and the long-term euro debt stays there forever and never gets paid back. But the Germans probably wouldn't agree to that anyway. That's been done before in Belgium about 80 years ago. In South Africa, some may remember more recently than that. So the EU is going to find it really rather difficult. So I'm so rude about the euro, I apologize, because it has been quite successful. He got rid of the world's most useless currency, the Belgian franc. By the time you'd worked out how many francs were to the pound, you were in Holland. Complete utter waste of time. What is the point of the Belgium? Well, what's the point of Belgium? Anyway, so with all of that, you have a trading bloc, still the largest trading bloc in the world, and yes, it is growing, but it's somewhat dysfunctional because it's not quite sure which way it's supposed to be going at the moment. So be wary, as the bureaucracy can easily find itself taking over on all of those elements. As we talk about Europe, I should mention something about Russia, because people get excited. Again, Hugh Edwards get excited about Russia. What do you see that aging aircraft carrier that had to be towed back to Russia because it wasn't working properly? People getting upset that a Russian ship coming into British waters, it was going through the English Channel, for God's sake. It had to be towed back. Big difference though between their aircraft carriers and ours. They've got something known as planes. It'll never catch on. So actually you find ourselves in a position, therefore, where Russia is not a superpower. Remember, its economy is 50%, its entire economy, the GDP, is 50% of that of the United Kingdom. Russia's huge, isn't it? We all know that. But the value of its economy is tiny in comparison. So if we get upset, someone fires a missile, and that's another £250,000 gone, that's a lot of money to us. It's even more to them. So be wary of what you're being told about this. You have a dangerous power, not a superpower. And particularly dangerous when you've actually got a large bear with its paw on a gas tap heading towards Germany. Something you need to be wary of. Its population shrinking, numbers are falling off a cliff, some I suspect probably being pushed, but that's another issue altogether. So put that in its right perspective. When Putin came to power in the last century, he said he was going to spread the economy over different asset classes, different areas. In fact, diametrically the opposite has happened. He's narrowed it down even more to oil and gas and minerals. So actually they find themselves in a difficult position overall. So put that in its box for the time being. It's not that important. We should spend more time talking about, well, there's an elephant and there's a dragon in the room. The dragon is obviously the Chinese and the elephant is obviously the Indian economy. Remember, there are still 3 numbers to remember about Britain, and I'll come back to them, but it's 5, 8, and 15. Britain is still the 5th largest economy in the world if you measure it by GDP. People say, we're about to get overtaken by France. No, we're not. What you do is you're actually going to probably overtaken by India. That's quite possible. In fact, that will happen. The other numbers I'll come back to in a moment. The Indian economy has been doing really rather well indeed. But it operates in a very different way to obviously that of China. And you were hearing from Ian and Gordon about the issues of subcontracting out to India and other elements like that. India is not actually just wants to find itself in the cheap labor market, although it is. Both India and China are working their way up the sophistication tree, so that they're actually doing more higher value business or higher margin business, which is why you see so much investment going in elsewhere. These 2 countries work in a very different way. But of course they do have slight problems. They can't stand each other. They have slight few border disputes. Kashmir, of course, is an Indian-Pakistan problem, isn't it? Well, it is, apart from the fact that 20% of Kashmir was taken by the Chinese. The direct translation is to look after it. Oh, that's very good. Just ask the Tibetans, they've got that same issue. And then also disputes in Sikkim and Assam over borders there. 20 Indian troops killed 3 months ago. You don't get to hear much coverage of this. So be wary of these 2 and how they're operating. China is going to continue to grow as well. Why? Because it's a one-party state. But the problem it's got, as a one-party state, and remember, companies only go bust in China when the party allows it to go bust. But that one-party state finds itself in a difficult position when the economy is not growing so well. If the economy starts slowing up, and you get things sort of unemployment or people not being able to have sufficient food and issues like that, it's amazing what happens very quickly. 2,000 major social riots last year in China. Not mentioned by Hugh Edwards. Oh, actually by the press, because it's suppressed. But nonetheless, you see this weakness in there. So they were doing what is necessary to keep that system going. And part of keeping that system going, there are 2 things you can do. One is make sure the trade, particularly the US, still continues to grow, despite the arguments between them, and also the old-fashioned trick of wrapping yourself in the flag and blaming Johnny Foreigner. We'll take Taiwan back, it's ours. And remember, they've 100 years of humiliation ever since the 1840s when we had the Opium Wars. I always love it. We criticize the likes of Colombia for allowing exports of cocaine in huge amounts. During the 1840s, we were actually extremely good at not only growing opium, but also selling it. And if you didn't actually buy it, we'd fight a war with you. So the Chinese said, we don't want heroin here, please, thank you very much. So we had the first Opium War. They didn't go along with it, so we had a second Opium War, and we end up with Hong Kong. So we're actually very good when it comes to drug dealing. Well, that was history. So the Chinese, though, as far as they're concerned, Austria, Hungary, Belgium, America, Japan, everyone was nibbling at them for 100 years. So it's not necessarily payback time, but as far as they're concerned now, they're not going to be quite as polite as they had necessarily would have been before. You look at the Belt and Road policy around the world. This is all about buying influence. And when the Chinese first went into Africa, I was watching this in Uganda. They didn't just speak Swahili, they were making sure they were speaking the local patois. The second wave of Chinese come in, no, they speak Swahili, not the patois. Third wave, we build Chinatown, you're not allowed in. This is neo-colonialism. A classic example was in Sri Lanka, where you saw Chinese authorities there building a port. You need a port in the bottom right-hand corner of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankans say, why? There's not much here. There's a few elephants wandering around. That's about it. No, but you need a port. Okay, well, we'll build it for you. All right, okay, we'll lend you the money. Yeah, fine, go ahead. They build the port. And it just happens to fit the entire Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean. The Indians get a bit pissed off because it's called the Indian Ocean. The sort of name is in the title, not the Chinese one. Oh, by the way, the rate of interest was very low to start with, but it ratcheted up, particularly if there were any delays, and over a certain point, funny enough, the ownership then moved from Sri Lanka, and the port is now owned by the Port of Shanghai. So neocolonialism is back in another form. So China is very important in terms of its investment, but beware of what you're dealing with on that one. So again, it is still a positive sign after what's happened. We're almost going back to some of the old politics. None of this is particularly new. Briefly then, let's move on to some of those other emerging economies. My own part of the world, down in ASEAN in Southeast Asia, here you can see the rise of the Oriental consumer, which is actually my daughter. Back in Jakarta, 30 years ago, there were 7 or 8 shopping malls. I don't know how many of you have been to Westfield in London, in Stratford or Shepherd's Bush, but it's huge. There are now over 80 of those in Jakarta alone. The rise of the Indonesian consumer, not just Indonesia, but particularly Malaysia, all those other areas, is quite remarkable. So again, that boosts the economy. They've had to go through the same issue that we've had, but they're coming out the other side as well. So I'm quite encouraged by that. Now, what else? Let's talk a little bit then about the UK. 3 numbers, I said. 5, 5th largest economy. 8, what's the other thing you hear on the BBC? Well, we don't make anything anymore. Really? We're the world's 8th largest manufacturer. I have to say, ignore the past 18 months because the data you'll get is unreliable, to say the least. We still make a lot of stuff. I think I may have mentioned you before, we're actually going to the joys of Accrington. I have no idea where Accrington was, or Accrington Town, or Accrington Stanley, isn't it? Accrington Stanley Nil, I'm told is the proper title. And you go there, and I had to do an interview with the local BBC radio, and they said, oh, I don't know why you've come here. We haven't recovered from the last recession yet. And I said, hang on. Have you been to your business parks? I don't know. They're not busy. I said, well, actually, they're full. Have you seen the labour requirements there? There's a shortage of technical labour. They can't employ the people, enough people. Exports at a record level. Now, this is really quite astonishing. And so a lot of this is then down to confidence. So everyone will sit there and say, oh, it's all doing so badly. Well, actually, it's doing quite well. The other figure is 14 or 15, depending on how you like to interpret it. 14 or 15, we are the 14th or 15th largest exporter in the world. We don't export anymore. Yes, we do, quite a lot. Not nowhere near as much as before, mainly because the banks buggered off. And therefore doing riveting things like letters of credit and all those elements has to be done quite often by the Chambers of Commerce. And you can't just do exporting on the side. It's a serious business you have to deal with in the longer term. So those numbers, I think, are actually quite encouraging. The other issue, of course, and this will affect you directly, and again, more opportunities for you, is that, of course, actually, we still set up more businesses in this country than France and Germany put together. Now, some of it, of course, is because people have got the bravura to go out and do it, because you do have to be brave. Definition of running a small business, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, wondering if you've still got one. And so, it is difficult. Some, of course, had to set up on their own, because, of course, the euphemism for an unemployed banker is a consultant. And there's an awful lot of those who do wandering around at the moment. But other people found themselves, effectively out, and they had to go off and go and do their own thing. And starting a business is easier, much easier than it was. I remember talking to my mother donkeys years ago. She was a rather tall lady with a long, snooty nose, and she'd line up her children. Quite a few of us. She went through 3 husbands, one of which purported to be my father, but the details are a little hazy. And she would say, so what are you going to do with your career? Me? Oh, I want to have my own business. Oh, my God, you want to go into trade. Do you realize we have a separate door for that? That was a sort of typical British middle class point of view because people didn't have their own business. They were a professional, like yourselves, worked for a large corporation, worked maybe in the services, worked for the government, but very rarely actually were they actual entrepreneurs setting up a new business. That didn't happen. So that's changed radically over the past 30 years, which is very exciting. We're really good at setting businesses up. We're really bad at financing them in their growth. And that's an area I think we do have to try and address. But what has happened, though, as a result of the pandemic is companies are sitting there, look what's happened now, and they're looking at the way they operate their business. You were hearing earlier, both Ian and Gordon, about technology. People are saying, how can technology help me with this? We've got used to Zoom and all those sort of things. But more to the point, how do I now protect my business from the future, from the next area of risk? I know what's going to be happening. My supply chains having an impact on me. Even if it's my customers' supply chains, I'm affected by it. What do I do to make my business more resilient? Therefore, I'll be coming to talk to you. What do I have to do? And so actually companies now are looking at more localization. Can I provide things locally, supply things locally, and be able to provide something which has got less risk to it? It doesn't mean you're going to be making iPhones in Isleworth anytime soon. But it does mean other things will be considered, which maybe could be made locally, maybe a little bit more expensive. But it's giving more surety to my business in terms of the next storm when it comes through. As I say, that's where they're going to need you to help with all that and you work your way through. So I find that really rather encouraging. Then they also take another area. You have all these nicknames for these areas around the country. You've got Silicon Roundabout in London, Silicon Beach, which is Brighton apparently, Silicon Gorge, that's Bristol, Silicon Fen, Glen, or you name it. Also, basically what this is are just nicknames for areas of technology, where little technology hubs have started up, and they breed. And before you know what happens, they start having groups of them. And what makes them breed? Well, access to capital helps, yes, but also the technology and the making sure you've actually got the right infrastructure in place. And that doesn't necessarily mean trains, or in some cases it does, but most of the time it's actually making sure you've got proper internet, high-speed internet, properly put through in a timely manner. And it's amazing then how that grows and develops. And what you'll see is really good, smaller companies coming up with really good ideas and product innovation, and then finding themselves being bought up by other companies around the world, elsewhere. And before you know what happens, the intellectual property's disappeared elsewhere, and that was a good idea, wasn't it? Many years ago, we used to have in this country, in fact in 1945, which I'm pleased to say I can't remember, we had 45 stock exchanges in this country. 45! Most of them were useless, run by silly gits in red braces who hadn't got a clue what they were on about. There were 7 that were fairly sensible. So what's the primary purpose of the stock exchange? To actually not trade shares, is to raise capital for business in the most cost-effective manner. Raise capital for business in the most cost-effective manner. On that basis, I would argue the London Stock Exchange isn't a stock exchange because it focuses on big business. Oh, we've got AIM. AIM was started by 6 of us in Glasgow as a small stock exchange. Light touch regulation, simple, very straightforward. And actually, we are first companies we floated on what was to become AIM. We didn't call it that then. Were actually software companies dealing with technology games. Basically, it was glorified ping pong in those days, but that was it. It was all very exciting. But it showed what could be done, and it was done locally, with regional investments on a regional market, with regional corporate advisors, most of whom were the regional corporate accountants giving that advice. And what happens now is companies get to a certain scale, and where do they go to? They go to London. And in fact, some of the deals said, and by the way, if you're investing in you're going to use one of the large accountancy firms. Why is that? Oh, because we need to make sure we have it, because actually they're getting a fee for doing so. That's wrong. So the ability, therefore, to try and provide a greater broad range of investments here, I think is very exciting indeed. And it's going to involve you directly with all of that. So private equity, I have to say, come back to that, be rather wary, because they are too short term. They look at 3 years. 3 years is not a business cycle. If you get debt for 3 years, or investment for 3 years, the first thing you do is start planning for the 4th year. It takes a long time. Investing is 5 to 7 to 10 years, not 3 years. See, that's why you want to have. So get to the system whereby, again, using my regional corporate accountant to help advise the company to be investable, make sure the company needs the right sort of capital. Is it capital? Is it debt? What balance do you have to have? And also, what shareholders do you want? Most people are saying, well, I want the money. Who are the shareholders? I don't care, just give us the money. No, stop. Who do you want as shareholders? First of all, you want to know, are you a long-term shareholder, or are you just going to have a punt? I don't want people having a punt, thank you. This is my business. I've got people working for me and with me. I've got customers. This is a long-term business, not someone taking a punt on it. Is it a supplier? Because actually I want to lock in some of my suppliers because I need you when times get tough. Maybe even some of the consumers, maybe business consumers. Is it staff, management, all sorts of areas? You can design the base you actually want to be able to have. And that I find really very exciting indeed, and will take you into a different area. So, the opportunities coming out of the pandemic, let's look at that. One, the supply lines shorten, and so as they shorten, people try and find ways of protecting themselves. And in order to do that, that's going to take introducing new businesses, maybe new ways of doing things. The technology is there, and they need you to help you through it. Also, in terms of actually making sure restructuring. Companies will take this opportunity to restructure themselves. If you want a good, bad example, a good example of major restructuring, bad in, let's say, the way it was done, you take IAG, British Airways, and Air Fungus, and all that lot, International Airlines Group. The people running there are very, very sharp indeed. They took the opportunity here of actually making sure, right, during the pandemic, we renegotiate the pilots' deals, which means we pay less, renegotiate the air hostesses or the stewards' deal, and they get less. We get rid of the planes we don't want. We actually then refinance the planes at a lower cost. And by the way, we raise capital at the lowest cost we've ever done in our life. Oh, and make life miserable so our competitors go out of business while the pandemic goes on. When it recovers, ta-da! I've restructured myself. Now, that's IAG. But for smaller businesses, they have to no doubt similar opportunities. What do I have to do to make sure I'm looking leaner and meaner to come out the other side? And again, that's where they're going to need your support with all of that. So this financing I find fascinating. So if you could actually have regional financing, I want to see regional hubs, not regional stock exchanges again, but regional hubs so that people could be actually marketing what's happening in the West Midlands, what's happening in Lancashire, what's happening in Yorkshire, and then promoting themselves, creating, as there used to be once upon a time, there used to be a Yorkshire index and a Scottish index to promote actually what's going on. Because a lot of people want to invest in Britain, but they don't want to go via London. Because since you go via London, you add an extra 0.5 to 1% on everything that goes on. There have to be better ways of trying to do all of that. And that I find quite encouraging. Again, this is something else that will involve you right the way through the process. The other issue you could try and do is what do we have to do to get the government to understand? Because most people in government don't really understand about business. They understand about having to deal with brown envelopes, how to actually then find themselves in a position where they're providing advice, and PR advice and all sorts of things, but actually, frankly, most of them have never been in business, and so don't really understand. That means you have to go and educate not so much them, but the Treasury. And the problem with our civil service, who up until now I've had a great deal of time for, but they've adopted modern HR policies, which means that you're in the Treasury for 3 years, and now you're going to move on to the Foreign Office, and then you're going to move on to Transport, and then somewhere else. They're very bright, but they don't have the expertise. You almost go back to Yes Minister again, where you knew full well that Sir Humphrey Appleby had been in that job for 50 years. He knew his job. She knew her job. They lost that knowledge and expertise. So it's up to us to try and educate. It's not up to us to actually sit there and say, let's have more handouts, please. We want to make ourselves more productive. How could you do that? Well, the investment packages that have been put forward in terms of giving tax breaks for investment, that's great. In my view, should be over 100% to actually make it really incentive. EIS is perfectly good, but I'd put an R in front of it and have regional enterprise investment schemes to purposely make sure that more money is being diverted into those areas, not for charitable reasons, but actually because they're perfectly good businesses that actually need to have capital, but the mechanisms aren't there. So we could put the plumbing back to provide local capital, provide the tax incentives to make sure that actually happens, and provide the infrastructure to make sure that all of that can be delivered. These are all relatively straightforward things which the economy can manage and doesn't actually cost the government a great deal because you can get funding from elsewhere. The government does not have to fund all of this, and that's the interesting issues. What the government should be doing is actually trying to reform the tax system. Now, here we have, a lot of you I know go to bed for some fascinating, exciting read at night with Tully's tax guide. Last time, I think it was 12,000 pages, seems to have added another 800 pages. I think it was the Office of Tax Simplification who seemed to have added 2,000 pages, who appeared to be doing the opposite of what they had with simplification. So there's a lot more that could be done. After all, we have national insurance, we have income tax. Well, those are the same thing. No, let's rationalize this, make it simpler. Let's reward people properly for having growth. Capital gains tax is a very dumb way of actually trying to do it. You should be encouraging longer-term wealth creation to get people to participate, to encourage people to be involved. And the short-term attitude of what we can get out over the next 1 or 2 years is dangerous for what's happening. Business rates, yes, we all know the arguments over that. But also one of the things close to my heart is we don't educate people about finance in this country. We all left university, or schools, whatever we went to, and no one told us a dicky bird about finance. You know, how to run even a credit card. We sort of learn how to run a credit card by running up a debt on it. Then you learn about it quite quickly. Or you leave university now with 30, 40, 50,000 pounds worth of debt, and no one's told you how to manage that. It's not even very cheap debt either. How much money do you need to retire on? Nobody tells you that. Now, I'm pleased to say that actually now many of you are linked together and maybe have your own businesses, wealth managers or financial planners, and the new generation of financial planners are great. The old generation of IFAs, who weren't very I and provided FA in most cases, actually were not very helpful. They've gone. Now you've actually got people actually providing, I think, far better value. Why? Because we need to spend, as a population, more time thinking about not just us as individuals, but our family. We feel very guilty. We should be working hard on our business. No, step back, step back. You're here and you're earning money. You're earning money for your life and your family's life. But no one tells you how you manage the family finances. We need people to be saving for their pension from the age of 0. Not giving them a junior ISA, so the time they get to 18, they can spend it all at the student bar, quite at some speed. No, you want it over decades to get the real benefit of compounding going through the process. And of course, all our families are different. You know, what are our families like? You've got husband, wife, second-hand husband, second-hand wife, and maybe something thereafter you don't talk about. You've got various children. You know, you've got two from her and him, and then another one you never told anyone. I have to say, that sounds a bit like my family. And then below that, you've got great-grand, and you've got your grandparents, which is really nice. They're still going, unfortunately. Great-grandparents, oh, for God's sake, they should have gone by now. They're hanging on by their dentures, still giving their... Look, for heaven's sake, at some stage, you know, a single flight on Ryanair to Switzerland, and we can resolve the issue quite simply. But how much is the family worth? By the time you've gone through 3 or 4 generations of that, worked out the liabilities and the assets, the family's worth a lot. Some of you deal with family offices. And that's all a family office is actually reorganizing the family into something that looks a bit more like a business. Actually making sure there's a family balance sheet. Now you can work out in terms of old age care, in terms of nursing homes, in terms of education, all those things can be managed across the generations. Who does that? It's you. So whether it's on the corporate side or whether it's on the personal side, we're coming out of the pandemic in a situation which I think provides us with, some really good opportunities. But do not wait for government to try and actually sit there and come up with them, because they will come up with half-hearted schemes. And we had our Chancellor's speech the other week, which looked remarkably like a Gordon Brown one to me, with lots of little ideas of so much money going to Doncaster and Swansea and this, that. These are tiny little things, not the bigger picture. And, you know, we get worked up over the level of debt we built up. But, of course, we built up debt based on quantitative easing. Go back to your economics book, if you've still got it from 30 years ago, and you won't even find it in the index. Quantitative easing existed, but was never really described. Now, during the banking crisis, it was fantastic. We were able to create money from nothing. And we could do it in this country, of course, because we have the Bank of England and we have the government, and they can actually write out the gilts, and the other side can buy the gilts, because the Bank of England is independent, isn't it? All right, then. Well, of course, the head of the Bank of England is appointed by the Treasury. There are 4 people who are appointed to the Bank of England by the Treasury and independent members, and there are 4 members from the Bank of England who have to be signed off by the Treasury to sit on it. And there are 2 members of the Treasury in on the meeting. But apart from that, it's completely independent. And so what you've got at the moment is an awful lot of debt being written on that side and being bought on that side. So anyone who's looking at a balance sheet would sit there and say, well, we can square this off. And you will do it in due course, but not yet. Because otherwise you'd lose the confidence of the markets. And markets at the moment believe us. We still have a reserve currency. The reserve currencies are yuan, not quite, but almost the Chinese one, dollar, euro, and yen. And sterling, but sterling's the smallest of those. And therefore, people trust us. We've never reneged on our debt. Even one of the states in America reneged on its debt once upon a time. Some of the other nations certainly have. So actually, they believe us. Quantitative easing isn't a confidence trick, but it is a trick of some confidence that people will still believe this on the basis that it can be sustainable. And it can be sustainable because rates are low. But rates are going to go up. Those inflation figures that came out this morning at 7 o'clock will underline the fact that rates will be going up quite soon. Not to a huge amount, but they need to go back because we're still on emergency levels at the moment. So it's actually quite sensible. But every time those rates move up, mortgages have already got more expensive. That changed 6 months ago. But the government debt at the moment, they're paying about 40 billion in interest. It's come down a bit, because the Office of Debt Management in South Croydon in London, nothing happens in South Croydon, it's the dullest place ever, but there's this Office of Debt Management. And they've been rescheduling the debt from Waterloo, for God's sake, and making it cheaper. But of course, every time those rates go up, the cost of that debt goes up. Not all of it, but some of it will. And you put that in perspective, we're spending nearly 50 billion a year on interest. That's slightly more than our defense budget. And it wouldn't take much to nudge that up to 60 or 70 billion. So the answer is you cannot carry on using the money tree without some severe problems and difficulties. So, after the pandemic, all of these elements are now there for you to take advantage of. In terms of the corporate issues, they need your advice. In terms of the capitalization and reinvesting, both in terms of debt and equity, they need your support. As individuals and their families, they're going to turn to you for support and help. And what's the one thing they get from you that they don't get from the BBC? Confidence. They trust you, they trust the profession. And you must actually then be able to go out and actually go ahead and tell them, look, this is a situation, it's not all perfect. We don't know all the answers, but actually we've got a reasonable idea of how we can try and manage our way through it and give them some help actually de-risking their system, de-risking the whole structure of supply chains and things like that. We survived the storm. It's still tough waters. But now we start planning for the next one. We don't know what it's going to be, but we can try and make sure the companies are more secure in what they're doing. And therefore more secure in what they're doing because they're dealing with a professional body of people who know what they're doing with a track record. There are very few people like that in this country. That is your profession. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Good luck, and good luck with your clients.